Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Brad. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. Wife flew to Vegas for the weekend, so it's the kids and I. We're having a party at the house. It's
nice.
It's gonna be a good time. I tried to talk my daughter into watching The Princess Bride last night for our movie night. I lost that vote, so we ended up watching the Peanuts movie, which was fine. But today there's going to be the pool, there's going to be fishing, we're going to make pizza on the Traeger, we're probably going to have a slumber party in the living room. It's going to be epic. What about you, man? How are you?
I remember when my kids were that age. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Good. We got my girl's birthday this weekend, so we're kind of doing a bunch of stuff. We went out with the Outlaws last night, and today, I don't know what we're going to do during the day. I think I got a bunch of stuff to do around the house, and kind of I got to build a birthday present. We got one of my daughters a bike, nice. Because at 14, that's what you want because it's freedom. But and then we're going out to a nice dinner tonight on the water, and nice. Just kind of chilling. Otherwise, this weekend, I don't know what it's like by you, but it has been hot around here, and it's just been like high humidity, high heat, and it's just nobody wants to do anything that involves being outside. So
yeah, it's been warm. We don't get the humidity here, but it's been 97, 98 every day for like the last 2 or 3 weeks.
I love summer and I love the heat, but when you start doubling it with like, you know, the double 90s, 90 degree plus heat, 90 degree plus humidity for a week plus, it gets a little old.
It's miserable. Yeah.
So, all right. Anyways, so today we've got an AMA scheduled. So we went out and fleshed out a few questions from folks, and we're going to just knock them out. So I think you get the list, right?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually going to switch up the order a little bit.
Sounds good, man. So
the first one comes from Andrew Jones, and it asks, how do you push past fear that can seem overwhelming?
That's an interesting question, because that's really one of those questions that needs to be asked in context, but we'll do the best here. For me, it's figuring out what you're afraid of. And it's always easier said than done, right? I always feel that way with these AMAs, but with pushing through something that you're afraid of, you gotta come down to the why, and you gotta discover, what's the root cause of that fear, and is it just a mental block? What are you doing? I'm trying to think of instances in my life where I've been kind of, for lack of a better word, paralyzed by fear. And it typically has to do with personal safety issues. So like, I have a fear of heights. So there's certain things that I just won't do because it involves, climbing. Like I look at people who like free climb, for instance, like climb without a rope and stuff. And I think they're absolutely insane. Like that's something I would never, ever do because I'd be captured by fear. But, there's other things in life where, maybe buying that house, you're paralyzed by fear and it seems overwhelming because of the financial investment. Those are the kind of things you can kind of sit through and look at it logically and really kind of dig into the why and create a plan and push through it that way.
So it's kind of funny because I always have this go-to strategy. And when you were talking about fear of heights, I'm like, well, I don't think the strategy would prove out. But the strategy is this, oftentimes if you want to think about it from a boring angle, it's a risk-benefit analysis.
Yep.
It's what are the risks? What are the benefits? Or in other words, it is what is the worst that can happen if you do what you're scared of doing? And what's the worst that can happen if you don't? Now, obviously, when it comes to heights, the worst that can happen is you fall down and die. But this is something that I apply. We've talked about this in the podcast before. I spent so much of my life petrified of being honest, petrified of people knowing who I really was. I lived a life almost paralyzed by fear. Fear in being honest with my wife it haunted me for a long time. And there came a point in my life where I finally got the courage to start asking myself the question, what's the very worst thing that could happen if I tell my wife the truth in this situation? She could be really mad. But, I wasn't lying about affairs. I wasn't lying about, being, a criminal. I was lying about not taking the trash out. I was lying about buying something and not telling her. I was lying about going somewhere and not telling her. truthfully, if I started telling her, the worst thing that could happen was she would be upset with me because of what I did.
Mm-hmm.
She would get over that. She would overcome it. We'd be okay. We'd get out the other side. If I didn't, the worst that would happen is she would find out. Her trust would continue to be eroded. And eventually she would leave me. And as soon as I started putting that together, it gave me at least a jolt of courage that I needed to do that thing. And that has served me well since I first made that realization. You know, when I look at things that I want to do, but there's a certain level of fear there, it is, what's the worst that can happen if I do? What's the worst that can happen if I don't? And what I've found out is what's the worst that can happen if I don't is always significantly worse. And obviously I haven't put heights or swimming in shark-infested waters in this list, but for things that are a little bit more practical in terms of how I live my life, it works really, really well.
I would argue that you have put those things on that list, though, because the outcome there, what's the worst possible outcome? Death.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm also not.
Am I willing to risk that? Probably not.
Probably not. Are the odds of death high? Yes. Okay. Reevaluate.
Yeah. Your response and that kind of risk reward analysis reminds me of a guy who's in our local friends group. Guy went through a really bad divorce. Really just kind of like scorned with women, just like was just whatever. And for a long time, we just kind of, let him be. And eventually, like, dude, you got to get back in the game. Like, you deserve to be happy. You deserve to have someone special in your life, whatever. And he was petrified of asking a woman out because of what had happened to him. And eventually we started just saying, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? Worst that's going to happen is she's going to say no. It's like, dude, we're not, 20 years old anymore. She's not going to laugh at you if you walk up to her in a bar and try to start up a conversation. It's like, just at this point in life, like, people aren't like that. And we eventually got him to do it. And now the joke is we've created a monster because he's got so much self-confidence of walking up to women and just having conversations. It's interesting how once you break through that fear, and listen, it's a hard thing to do the first couple times, right? But once you break through fear in a situation, you realize that, yes, there's still that worst thing that could possibly happen, but those worst things that could possibly happen are usually not high probability situations.
Yeah.
And, typically, like for this guy, for instance, he's at least going to have a conversation with a woman for 5 or 10 minutes, whether he gets a phone number, whether he gets a date, whatever. That's secondary to. She's not going to sit there and point and laugh in his face with her friends at the bar or whatever. He's like, it's. I walk up to her, and if she's not interested, she'll just say, hey, not tonight. I'm just out with the girls or whatever. And otherwise, it's a 5 or 10 minute conversation. And I learned a lot from that in the sense of a lot of the fears that we develop are exactly that, fears that we developed. They're not really there. Yes, there's a probability that some of those, outcomes occur, but to use the word that you use a lot of times you're catastrophizing the situation and you're dwelling on the worst possible outcome as opposed to really what's the highest probability outcome.
You almost create this narrative, this fantasy, this illusion that the worst case scenario is something absolutely, truly awful, and that you can't do something because this scenario you're making up in your head is going to be the one that plays out.
Right.
It doesn't. I mean, probably there are examples in history where something like that has happened, but that is unbelievably rare. The fact of the matter is, just like Dan in your scenario, your buddy was scared of a girl. The worst thing that could happen is she's going to tell him no. That's it. But through repetition, he realizes that fear and that thing that I've set in my head that I believe is this petrifying, immobilizing thing didn't happen. It actually felt pretty good to go push past my limits and challenge myself a little bit. I'm going to do it again and again. The fear doesn't go away. I'm sure every time he goes up to a girl, he's a little nervous. I mean, we all should be.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, he realized I have a pretty good idea what the outcome is going to be. I'm going to grow from it. This comes back to repetitions, just like we were talking about the other day. You put in the reps, that fear subsides, and you learn how to not only overcome it, but almost, I would say, embrace it.
Yeah.
Like, this can be scary. That's okay. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. And, back to Andrew's question, he's obviously asking this because of something that's going on in his life, right? So he's got to figure out that what's causing that fear, what the worst possible outcome is, what the typical outcome is probably going to be, and then kind of figure out a plan to mitigate the risk but still push forward. So, Andrew, if you want to reach out to us, obviously on social media or something, we can have a deeper conversation about exactly your situation and maybe try to game plan something. But I think that you've got a lot of good feedback here. So.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks for that question, Andrew. Moving along, number 2. This is from Aaron Williams. Says, how do you exhibit restraint when someone doesn't seem to care? And I'm going to assume this question is referencing a situation where you feel like they should care, but they don't.
Yeah, I'm. When I read this question, I was kind of thinking the same thing. I was thinking about a situation where, let's say at work, where you've got an employee who just doesn't care. They don't care if they're late. They don't care if they're early or not early, but if they're doing quality work, that kind of thing. Or you've got somebody in your personal life who just doesn't seem to care how their actions affect you. Exhibiting restraint. It reminds me of a story I heard once on a Manager Tools podcast, and I'll try to keep it brief. But the guy telling the story, he was mentioning how he was in an elevator with a colleague, and they were in the back of the elevator, and a guy walks in with an umbrella under his arm. And as people come to the elevator, the guy with the umbrella gets closer and closer to the guys in the back, and eventually, through the hustle and bustle of having everyone in the elevator, it starts poking the storyteller. And eventually everyone gets off the elevator except for the storyteller and his buddy. And he looks at his buddy and goes, "Can you believe that guy?" He goes, "His umbrella was poking me the whole time." He goes, "And that pissed me off so much." And his buddy just laughed and looks at him. He goes, "No, the guy poked you with the umbrella." He goes, "You got upset all on your own." And the idea of the story is you control your emotions. So exhibiting restraint, that's all on you. You have the ability to control your response. You have the ability to control your emotions. Whether you decide to fly off the handle and yell and scream and have a temper tantrum, or you stay calm and just have a direct conversation with the person, that's up to you. But the other person's not seeming to care, you have very little impact on that, but you have every impact on the way you respond.
Yeah, that actually takes me back to a Stoic principle that regardless of the circumstance, the world doesn't care about your reaction. You might get pissed off or angry or frustrated or feel like you need to show restraint, but to what end? The world's going to continue going on anyway. That person has zero bearing on your emotional response, whether for better or for worse. And it takes me back to a conversation I might have been having with you, Dan. I was having with somebody. It was you or maybe it was Cam. But essentially the gist was, man, that whole situation makes me so mad. And the thought behind that was, what makes you mad? You make yourself mad. The situation didn't make you mad. You chose to respond in that way. So when somebody is saying, to be fair, Aaron, I don't know the particulars of your situation, but what are you trying to exhibit restraint from? Yeah, maybe somebody's apathetic. Maybe they don't care. But genuinely, what's it to you for them not caring the way that you think they should? You're projecting your priority, if you will, onto somebody else. And it just comes down to this, spending all that time dwelling on how that person is feeling or how you perceive they aren't feeling, that's doing you more damage than good. You're spending way too much mental energy on a situation where in reality, what's it to them? Now there are certain scenarios where, again, we don't have all the context, but if there's apathy in something like parenthood, like your wife is not as involved in your kids and you're concerned about that, okay, that's a different situation. But for the most part, most scenarios where it's not directly impacting you, take a step back. Maybe think about why you are trying to project how you feel about a situation onto somebody else and reevaluate.
Have I ever told you about the E plus R equals O?
Oh yeah, we had almost a whole podcast on it.
Yeah. So, Aaron, if you hadn't heard that, the idea is that it's something that a boss of mine once taught me. It's E plus R equals O. Event plus reaction equals outcome. So the idea with the whole thing is you don't own the event. You don't control the event. It's something that just happens, right? So in this case, it's somebody's apathetic response to a situation. You know what you want your outcome to be, and you control your reaction accordingly, right? So listen, you're talking about exhibiting restraint, which implies that you're going to have a, we'll say, animated response to the situation. Is that going to get you the outcome you want, or does controlling your emotions, taking a step back, taking a breath, and then having a calm response get you the outcome that you want? Only you're going to know that. But simply flying off the handle because somebody has a reaction or doesn't appear to care the way that you want them, to the level you want them to care, you're going to end up with an outcome that you may not desire. Now, the flip side to that is, and I don't want this to be perceived as me giving you permission to fly off the handle or have an emotional response, but sometimes that's the only response people will react to. I've had situations with my kids where I try to be calm, try to be direct, but try to be just, chill and talk to them when they're either screwing up or they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. And sometimes it's the emotional response that gets the outcome that I want. Long term, it doesn't, though. It's an immediate thing versus a long term thing, right? So if I yell at my kids, I will get the immediate response that I want of them. I don't know why I always go back to emptying the trash, but them emptying the trash or doing the dishes or whatever. But long term outcome, I'm eroding my relationship with them. So it's something to think about. The flip side to that is if your kid's going to put their hand on the stove, a quick emotional response is the correct one because the calm response is going to result in them burning their hand. So it's all about the situation. It's all about the dynamics of the relationship that you have. But keep in the back of your mind, and it's something, I'll tell you what, it's something that served me well both personally and professionally. And it's something I continuously have to work on. But event plus reaction equals outcome is such a powerful tool in the way that you deal with people that it's something you should be implementing in your life on a regular basis.
Awesome. That's some great feedback. All right. Let's move on to number 3. This one's a heavy hitter. So it comes from Liam Diggs. And he asks, what's one lesson you wish you had learned sooner that would have saved you a lot of trouble? It's like, this is like turn this into a novel.
Wow, this is open-ended.
Yeah.
I mean, you threw these up before we were recording, and I was taking a look at this, and I'm going, well, what aspect of life? Because there's parenting, there's career, there's physical fitness, there's, all of those break down into subcategories.
Yeah. Finance, all kinds of stuff.
I'm going to actually go back to something we were talking about before, or what we were just talking about with Andrew. The E plus R equals O thing is such a versatile concept that if I had learned that earlier in life, because I'll be the first to admit that when I was younger, in my 20s, and then even when we had kids, when the kids were little, I was prone to emotional responses like you read about. I was the asshole who punched a hole in the wall early on in my marriage because we got into a fight. I was the dad who yelled at his kids when they were 4 and just being 4-year-olds. It was never, I feel like I'm trying to justify it by that statement, so I'm not even going to say that. But, it was stuff that I was not proud of. I wouldn't say that it was stuff that was abusive, but it definitely was not an image of the man that I was striving to be. And if I had learned how to control my emotions and take a step back and be able to evaluate the situation, and that's really what that whole concept is being able to detach from the situation, evaluate it, and then make a calculated response. That skill set, something I'm still developing today, would have put me in much better positions in certain parts of my life. Now, did I learn from those? Yeah. Would I have had experience perhaps better or more success in life, however you want to define that? Yeah. If I had had a more calculated, less emotional response.
Yeah. It's wild. You look back I can still think of very, very specific scenarios where, I yelled at my daughter or my son and just seeing their face as soon as I did.
Yep.
Or I went off the handle with my wife and just seeing her face and seeing her reaction. And it's interesting because you're never going to fully get rid of those times where you do something dumb, where you fly off the handle, where your emotions get the best of you. And almost instantly you can observe those things, those responses, those emotions within others, and you're just like, oh crap. For me, it's a little bit different. It would be very easy for me to go back and talk about fear. Obviously, fear in being honest with my wife is something I've talked about a lot. One thing I haven't talked about a lot is there comes a point where you have to really start diving into the why. When you start figuring yourself out and figuring out what you're doing, why you do things a certain way, why you tick the way you do, you start diving into why you think that is. And obviously, I'm a self-professed recovering nice guy, and that's something that I struggled with considerably. There came a point where I wanted to decide, okay, why was I a nice guy? What led to this? And this took a lot of digging. This actually required some EMDR on my part from a marriage counselor, and we settled upon this idea that I was conditioned throughout my life to feel as if I didn't matter. And obviously I did this to myself, right? But there were scenarios where I felt that my emotions did not matter. And I recognized that because this had been instilled upon me, through upbringing, through scenarios of my childhood, that resulted in me trying to become somebody else, to do away with my interests or my cares, to try to become this person for somebody else. And that led to some very hardcore nice guy stuff. And that meant that everything that mattered to me needed to be buried because people didn't care. Because people didn't care, that they should not be a priority, that I shouldn't be a burden on others. And I only fairly recently recognized this. Yes, I've been on this recovering nice guy path, and I've really transformed my life in a lot of ways in the last 4 to 5 years, especially in the last 3. The last 3 are where that trajectory really took off. But I did not make that realization. It was maybe 2 years ago when I made the realization that I didn't feel as if I'd mattered. And looking back on that, how much did that hold me back? How much did that prevent me from being able to really, truly do the things that I wanted to do? And it also held me back in terms of being the kind of man I wanted to be for my wife and for my kids, and trying to be a leader in my community. And what's interesting is, as soon as I unshackled that and realized that I do matter, that my feelings, my thoughts, my opinions, my place in this world do matter, it's interesting how quickly my life kind of started taking off as a result. We've talked professionally about, my trajectory at work. Obviously there are things at home that are so much better. And it makes me think, man, had I realized that years and years and years ago, how different would my story be now? How much less damage would I have caused had I simply recognized, you know what? There is a level of importance there. I am able to do more freely what I want. Because I'm able to more freely do what I want, I'm more freely able to be authentic with those around me. That authenticity is what divides or separates a nice guy from, the rest of the population. So they feel like as if they can't be authentic. Men who are comfortable in their own shoes know they can be authentic. So that's just kind of a long-winded way of saying I wish at some point I had realized that me, my feelings, my thoughts, my person mattered on a broad scale.
I've got 2 things to kind of wrap up with that one. One is I like the concept of the question and just the idea that, this platform gives us a place to talk to other men, and perhaps younger guys can learn from us and maybe not make the same mistakes that we did. That being said, if I had known, or you had known, the things that we just talked about 20 years ago, would our life have turned out as well as it did now? Maybe, arguably it could be better, but would we appreciate the accomplishments that we've made? Would you appreciate the fact that you learned that 20 years ago the way you appreciate it now?
Of course not.
Right. So what I'm getting at is we all kind of have these paths to go and these journeys to go on, and these battles, these internal battles to fight. And part of growth is overcoming your hurdles, right? It's having all the answers up front is great, but you don't value those things. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with my wife last night. A friend of ours who does very well for themselves rented or at least a new car for their 16-year-old. And we were joking about it because it actually, the concept to me is so foreign. It's like they're never going to appreciate something nice unless they have to work their ass off to afford something shitty in the beginning, right? It's if you're always given something good and nice and the best, do you ever appreciate those things fully because you've had to go from, the 1986 Mercury GT Lynx with 6 different versions of red body panels and a push button on the horn. That was my first car that I bought from $1 from my grandfather. And
nice.
As I rolled it into the garage, the first day I got it, the water pump dumped on him and he just laughed with the $1 and walked away. That was the kind of crap that I started with. To now I've got, Brad, you've seen my truck. Like it's the apple of my eye. It's my favorite, it's one of my favorite possessions.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah. So it's like when you work hard from something and you start from nothing and you earn those things along the way, in my mind, you appreciate it. And again, I don't think that Liam was thinking about this when he asked the question, but sometimes you got to work through the hard shit to appreciate the good shit.
Yeah.
So.
It's how well put is that? It is common for us to just look and say, man, I should have figured this out earlier. If you live your life through hindsight, you forget and don't recognize the many valuable lessons you've learned along the way. I can look at you and know you've gone through some pretty heavy things in your life. You're better for it. Obviously when you're stuck in a miserable, horrible situation, it sucks. Like we talk to our friend Cam, you and I constantly. I feel like he's only now coming out of essentially 2.5 years of perpetual chaos. And there were times he felt he was going to break. And our message to him was always, and always has been, stick this through. You'll come out the other side better for it. And you're starting to see that in his life. Like he's starting to come out the other side, and the strength and the resilience and the confidence and the capacity that he has gained from that will benefit him for the rest of his freaking life. Obviously I look through, my wife having cancer. I hate that situation. I hate how I responded to that situation. I hate that she had to go through that. I wouldn't want that on anybody. It was awful.
That situation and your response to it taught you to be a better man.
I handled that situation so poorly that I had to change who I was foundationally, and I'm better for it. Yeah. Do I wish that it had to come through a different means than that? Of course.
Yeah.
But
that's what people mean when they say they're grateful for those tough situations. Yes, it's not the situation and what they it's what they endured, what they learned about themselves, and how it changed them for the better in the long run.
You will not gain character from an easy life. You won't figure out who you want to be through everything going exactly the way that you wanted it to. It comes back to the Bruce Lee quote that we've talked about. It's one of my favorite quotes. Do not pray for the strength. Don't pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a hard one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what we used to say on our battle team when we were on a battle team together. It's growth comes from the discomfort, right? It's being in those difficult, hard situations. That's where you get forged. That's where you get, battle tested. And listen, Liam, if you can learn the lessons earlier in life, that's great. But don't discount the battle either. Don't discount having to go through, the trials and tribulations of life to come out a better man on the other side, because that's where you are formed. It's within those tough situations that I found out who I am, and I continue to find out who I am.
Yeah. That doesn't mean they don't suck to go through, because they do. But the older you get, and I know Liam, he's a pretty young guy. The older you get, the more you realize I will come out the other side.
Yeah.
This too shall pass. And when it does, you'll look back at the lessons learned, and you know what? You're going to go through a shitty situation and you're not going to react well. It's going to happen.
So,
but
go ahead.
But that doesn't dismiss that there are incredible lessons that you can learn from that and can glean from that and grow from to make the rest of your life better.
So a question for you then, right, is we hear about all the time the concept of learning from others' mistakes and not repeating the past and all this stuff. Yet we just talked about the value of hardship, the value of going through the fires and the tribulations. So which one is it? Is it if we are good students and we learn from the past, then we'll have a better life? Or is it I will be a stronger man because I went through all the trials and tribulations?
It's honestly, it's the latter. It's no matter what we say, we'll learn from the mistakes of the past. If you haven't experienced that firsthand, if you haven't made those mistakes, how prone are we to repeating them? You
but
look at this.
what I'm talking about, the mistakes of the past, I'm like, me learning from your past and not recommitting your sins versus me learning from my past and the sins that I've committed.
Yeah, I knew that was your question. I was getting there.
Okay.
You didn't experience that. That wasn't your firsthand account. Like you don't know my situation nor my outcomes, and because you didn't feel the pain from the choices that I made, you're not going to go into that saying, "Oh man, that one time Brad did this. I shouldn't do that." You're much more likely to do that thing because you haven't lived that firsthand. You don't have that gleaned insight from being stupid on your own, if that makes sense.
It's the equivalent of reading a book versus putting the tips into action and actually feeling how it works, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
The other thing you were talking about in your response was you started talking about the why and that kind of stuff early on, and I thought that the concept of the why really fit in well with the E plus R equals O thing that I was talking about, because when you take that step back and you start to look at your reaction, the 5 why process that we've talked about in the past is really useful to determine why you want to have the immediate reaction that you want to have. And what is something as simple as, you can apply this to anything, but something as simple as buying a new piece of backpacking gear. I've actually made myself sit down and say, okay, you want that new backpack. Why? The event is I want the new backpack. I got to determine what the outcome is by my reaction. So I sit down and I do why. I want a new backpack because my backpack's too heavy. Well, why do you want a lighter backpack? Well, I want to be able to carry, weight longer, whatever. And I go through this whole thing, and it comes down to the why is because I really just want to buy myself something new and nice because I've had this backpack for 5 years. Well, is that really a reason to buy a backpack right now? Yeah, it could be. Yes or no. It depends on your financial situation. But let's get real with ourselves about why we're making a decision. And the concept of why and really digging in, and the concept of controlling your emotional reaction to something combined is a really powerful tool.
Yeah, that is a very, very powerful tool. And that's, you'll learn a lot about yourself. In that situation, I want a lighter backpack because I want something new. Okay, it's lighter. Might be 2 pounds lighter. Is 2 pounds worth $250 or whatever you're going to spend on the backpack? Right. And maybe it is, depending on your circumstances.
Right.
But those are the things that you have to weigh and consider and make an informed decision on.
Yeah. Know yourself and really know why you're doing something that you're doing. Right. And it's, I think we've talked before about AARs, like after action reports, and how you can have kind of a formal process to it. Eventually those become almost like mental checklists. This E plus R equals O thing also almost becomes like a mental checklist of sorts. Like, I'm getting to the point where something happens and my immediate thought is, if I react this way, I'll get this outcome. If I react this way, I'll get that outcome. I kind of go down the list, and it's just like kind of like a choose your own adventure book at a certain point, because you're determining, okay, if I react in a certain way, I'm going to get that outcome. Is that the outcome that I really desire? Yes or no? Move on.
Well, good conversation. Thanks, men, for sending those questions. Keep them coming. Any questions you want to post, put them on social media, on our Instagram. You can send them to us on our Facebook page. We love hearing from you guys. So thank you.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys listening. Brad mentioned, we've got a couple of social media places. Instagram and our Facebook page are the places we're most active. Check us out there. You can find links to all of those at untamingmasculinity.com. You'll find the links to our social media as well as show notes for this and all of our other episodes. As always, if you're finding value here, which we really hope you are, make sure you're giving us a rating and review on your podcast players. Apple and Spotify seem to be the big ones, but we recently launched on YouTube, and that's coming on pretty strong as well. So make sure you're giving us 5 stars, you're giving us a review. It really helps us spread the word through whatever their algorithms are and get in front of more men. And make sure you come back next week. We've got more great content coming your way, and we're excited about what's coming down the pipe. So until then, we will leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?